All right, everyone, get ready, because today we are going deep on revolutions.
Ooh, exciting.
And not just any revolutions, but French revolutions.
I love those.
We're going way beyond just the basic stuff, though.
Sounds good to me.
Because one of you sent in this awesome research guide from the Library of Congress, and it's all about...
Ooh, a primary source.
Yeah, primary source, and it's all about women in the French Revolution.
That's going to be good.
And you know how we love to go deep?
Uh-huh.
And we love to include your suggestions.
Absolutely.
Well, this guide highlights 3 major revolutions.
Okay, let's hear it.
1789,
The big one.
1830, and 1848.
Whole trilogy.
It's like France, the land of love and lights.
Yes.
But also apparently uprisings.
Well, that's true. I mean, these weren't just like French events. They had ripples across the world.
It's true.
I mean, think about liberty, equality, the power of the people.
Huge.
Those weren't just French ideas. They resonated all across the globe.
Yeah, and we're still kind of grappling with them today.
For sure.
It's kind of crazy to think how long those ideas have been around.
Yeah.
So let's start with the revolution that kicked it all off.
Okay.
1789.
There we go.
You know, we've all heard the stories about Marie Antoinette, right? And like her lavish lifestyle and just completely out of touch with her people.
Oh, for sure.
But is that just like gossip, or is there something more to that?
I mean, there's some truth to that whole like out of touch thing.
Right.
But remember, the French monarchy wasn't just fancy parties.
I guess.
The system itself was just unequal.
In what way?
Think of like unfair taxes just crushing the poor.
Right.
All this talk of Enlightenment ideas like whispering around.
Promising something better.
Yeah, and you had a ton of people who were just fed up.
Yeah.
So it was like this powder keg.
Oh, yeah.
Just waiting for that spark.
And then boom, July 14th, 1789, the storming of the Bastille.
There's that spark.
What a moment.
What a moment.
That was when everyone was like, oh, France means business.
Right, because the Bastille that represented the monarchy's power.
Yeah.
So like tearing it down, that was huge.
Yeah, it was a statement.
But things took a dark turn pretty quick.
Oh, no.
The Reign of Terror.
Yeah.
That's like a reminder that fear, even in the name of revolution, can be a weapon.
Oh, yeah.
20,000 people executed.
That's a lot.
It was just paranoia. Everyone could be accused of being an enemy of the revolution.
It's crazy to think about that level of violence and to think that it led to the execution of Louis VI and Marie Antoinette.
Gone.
The monarchy just like that.
The guillotine that was a symbol of just breaking with the past.
It's true.
Like a line drawn in the sand.
It makes you think, though, can you really have true change without violence?
That is the question, isn't it?
It is. And then out of all this chaos comes this guy, Napoleon Bonaparte.
Uh-huh.
And he was like this military mastermind.
Total mastermind.
And he pretty much rode the wave of the revolution.
He did.
All the way to the First Republic.
The First Republic.
And eventually...
Emperor.
Well, it's almost like the revolution kind of ate itself.
You know, that happens sometimes in history. Revolutions make way for new power structures. And sometimes those are even more concentrated than the old ones.
That's wild. And so 1789 was this roller coaster of violence, radical change, and a new form of power.
Definitely.
But it wasn't over yet.
Oh, no.
Decades later, Charles X reignited the flames of revolution.
Round 2.
And this leads us to 1830.
Here we go again.
And it's interesting that this time it was a king who was trying to undo the changes of the first revolution.
Yeah. Charles the X, he issued these decrees called the July Ordinances.
Okay.
And he basically shut down Parliament.
Whoa.
Muzzled the press.
No way.
Tried to drag France back to the absolute monarchy.
What?
Yeah. So the people, they weren't too happy about that.
I can imagine, you know, listener, if you want to get a sense of that whole atmosphere, you should check out Victor Hugo's Les Miserables.
Oh, such a good book.
It captures the struggles and the spirit of that time.
It really does.
It's a reminder that, you know, those revolutionary ideas, they can persist even when things get rough.
Yeah, the June Rebellion of 1832.
Oh, yeah.
Which Hugo writes about so well.
Yes.
That was a direct result of everything that happened after Charles the X messed up.
So people were still ready to fight for the rights they had won.
Absolutely.
So Charles X is out.
Out of there.
And in comes Louis Philippe.
Our new king.
The citizen king.
I like that name.
So it seems like he was trying to balance things out. Appeasement and progress.
He had a tough job.
Yeah, and that's probably why he earned the name King of the Bourgeoisie.
Yeah, he was really walking a tightrope between the different factions.
Who were those?
You had monarchists who wanted to go back to the old ways. You had Bonapartists holding on to Napoleon's legacy. Republicans who were pushing for more democracy.
Okay.
And you even had the early stirrings of socialist movements.
So he must felt like he was juggling chainsaws.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But, he did oversee some modernization in France.
He did.
He did. But a lot of his policies ended up benefiting the middle class the most.
Hence the nickname.
Exactly. And so the working class felt ignored.
And then things get even more interesting because this research guide also talks about the rise of early feminist movements during this time.
I love it.
So while Louis Philippe's trying to keep everyone happy politically, women are starting to say, hey, what about us?
That's right. Thinkers like Claire de Mar, she was a radical feminist writer, and she was challenging everything.
Like what?
Gender roles, societal expectations, the whole 9 yards.
Wow. So they weren't just asking for a seat at the table. They were building their own table.
Exactly. Remember, revolutions aren't just about political power. They're about reshaping society's values and structures.
That's a really good point. It's amazing to think about how these revolutions weren't just like isolated events in France.
Right.
They were part of this much bigger wave of change happening all over the world.
Exactly.
I mean, didn't the American Revolution happen like right before the French one?
You're right. The American colonists throwing off British rule and forming their own republic.
Based on liberty and equality.
That's it. And that sent shockwaves across the Atlantic.
Okay.
It showed the French people that it was actually possible to get rid of a monarchy.
And make something totally new.
Exactly.
So was the American Revolution like the first domino to fall?
It's more like a chain reaction, I think.
Oh, a reaction.
And that chain just kept going.
Okay, where'd it go?
Look at the Haitian Revolution.
Okay.
That was inspired by what was happening in France.
So the slaves in Haiti, they saw what was happening in France and were like, hey, we want freedom too.
Exactly. They rose up demanding freedom.
And they were successful.
It was the first successful slave revolt in the Americas.
Wow.
And it really shook things up in terms of colonial power.
That's powerful stuff. So it really wasn't just contained to one country. These revolutions were inspiring each other across continents.
That's right. And that's one of the reasons I think we're still so fascinated by them today.
Yeah. Why is that?
Because they bring up these timeless questions about power and rights.
Yeah.
And what kind of society we actually want to live in.
That's true. And those themes, they go beyond any one country.
They really do.
Or time period, for that matter.
Absolutely.
And speaking of time periods, we've been talking about these 3 French revolutions together, but I know you said that each one had its own unique character.
Oh, they definitely did.
Can you kind of unpack that a little bit?
So 1789, that was the most radical.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was like they hit the reset button on French society.
Wow.
They abolished feudalism, got rid of it, and they established a republic.
Based on the idea that power comes from the people.
That's right. It was out with the old and in with the new, and, really new.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
So what about the other 2 revolutions?
Well, they weren't as sweeping as 1789,
Okay.
but they were still incredibly significant.
In what way?
Well, think about 1830 with Charles X trying to turn back the clock. Yeah. That revolution was all about reclaiming those ideals from 1789.
It was like the people were saying, wait a minute, we fought for these rights, and we're not just going to give them up.
Exactly. And then you have 1848.
Okay, the last one.
This one's a little more complex.
How so?
It wasn't just about politics this time. It was like a whole mix of frustrations bubbling up.
Like what?
Economic hardship.
Okay.
Social inequality, people feeling like they didn't have a voice.
Right.
And then you have the growing popularity of socialist ideas.
So it was like all this pressure had been building, and then that denied banquet permit was just the final straw.
That's a good way to put it. And remember, 1848 wasn't just happening in France.
It wasn't.
This was part of a wave of revolutions across Europe.
Wow.
Historians call it the Spring of Nations.
The Spring of Nations.
People everywhere were demanding change.
So again, we're seeing those interconnected revolutions.
Exactly. And on a bigger scale this time.
That's amazing. So did the 1848 revolution in France, did it actually achieve what it set out to do?
Well, it didn't achieve all of its goals.
Okay.
But it did have some lasting impacts.
Like what?
It led to the Second Republic, which didn't last very long.
Okay.
But it did bring about some important reforms, like abolishing slavery in French colonies.
Wow.
And recognizing the right to work.
That's huge. So even revolutions that don't achieve everything they set out to do, they can still plant those seeds for progress.
Absolutely. And I think that's something important to keep in mind as we look closer at the individual stories and events that shaped these revolutions.
Let's do it.
So let's zoom in on some of the key players.
Okay.
The people whose actions and ideas changed history.
All right, let's start with 1789. And I gotta ask about Marie Antoinette.
Oh, Marie Antoinette.
She's such an iconic figure, almost mythical.
It's true.
A symbol of the excesses of the monarchy.
Her story is a tragic one. Imagine being a young Austrian archduchess.
Okay.
Married off to King Louis VI.
Uh-huh.
And then thrust into this world of incredible wealth and power.
I mean, yeah.
At first she was popular, but, her lifestyle.
The lavish parties.
And the fact that people thought she didn't care about their struggle.
She was out of touch.
Yeah, that made her a target.
Right, like that whole let 'em eat cake line.
Oh, yeah.
Even though she probably didn't actually say that.
Probably not.
It totally sums up how out of touch she seemed.
Exactly. Whether she said it or not, the sentiment is there.
Yeah, the disconnect between the monarchy and the people.
And as the revolution gained momentum, Marie Antoinette, she became the face of everything that was wrong with the old system.
It's like something out of Shakespeare, a queen going from beloved to completely hated.
That's a classic tale of power and privilege.
And the consequences of ignoring the struggles of your people.
The fate of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI, it's a chilling reminder of how unforgiving revolutions can be.
And speaking of unforgiving, we can't forget Maximilien Robespierre.
Oh, Robespierre. He's a fascinating and terrifying figure.
Yeah, what was his deal?
He was a lawyer, a politician, and a key leader of the Jacobin faction.
The Jacobin?
Yeah, they became increasingly radical.
Okay.
And Robespierre, he believed that terror was a necessary evil.
He did.
A tool to protect the revolution.
Protect it from what?
From its enemies, from anyone who threatened its success.
But it went too far, didn't it?
It did.
Mm-hmm.
What started as a way to defend the revolution turned into widespread violence and repression.
A bloodbath.
Sadly, yes. And the irony is Robespierre himself became a victim of the terror he helped create.
What?
He ended up on the guillotine in 1794.
Oh, wow. Talk about a cautionary tale.
It really is a story about unchecked power.
And the dangers of taking things too far.
Even with good intentions, things can go terribly wrong.
Yeah, that's a lesson that keeps popping up throughout history.
Good intentions can't always prevent people in power from becoming tyrants.
All right, let's move on to 1830.
Okay.
Our research guide mentions a writer named Claire de Mar.
Oh, Claire de Mar.
And she was active in the early feminist movements of that time.
Yes, she was.
What's her story?
She's a fascinating figure. Claire de Mar was a working-class woman.
Okay.
No formal education.
And she became a writer.
She did. She became a writer and a passionate advocate for women's rights.
What kind of things was she advocating for?
Oh, she challenged everything. Traditional gender roles, societal expectations.
Wow.
She argued for women's economic independence, sexual freedom, access to education.
Those are radical ideas even today.
They are. She was ahead of her time.
Was she part of any organized movement?
She was associated with the St. Simonians.
Okay.
They were a socialist movement that was very forward-thinking, especially when it came to women's rights.
So they were advocating for women's emancipation.
It's interesting how these revolutions often gave rise to other social movements.
Yeah, it's like one wave of change creates another.
Exactly. Revolutions don't just challenge political structures, they challenge social norms and values too.
And Claire de Mar's work shows that...
Absolutely. Sadly, she died young.
Oh, no.
Possibly by suicide.
Yeah.
But her writings, they continue to inspire generations of feminists.
What a legacy to have sparked that kind of change, even in a short life.
It is remarkable.
Okay, shifting gears to the 1848 revolution.
Okay.
The research guide mentions a book called Balzac on the Barricades.
Oh, yes. That's a fascinating study by Rebecca Therese Powers.
What's it about?
It looks at how literature and revolution were intertwined,
Interesting.
focusing specifically on the works of Honoré de Balzac.
Balzac, the novelist.
That's right.
I remember reading some of his novels in college.
What did you think?
They were dense,
Yeah.
full of social commentary.
Well, that was Balzac's style. He was a master of realism.
Realism.
He captured the complexities of French society in his novels.
And Powers argues that his work actually influenced the political discourse of the time.
Exactly.
So even though his novels were fiction,
Huh.
they were reflecting and shaping people's views on things like class and capitalism.
And the role of women.
That's incredible.
Literature can be a powerful tool for change.
It can.
It can spark debate, raise awareness, inspire action.
Oh, wow. I never thought about Balzac that way.
And Powers makes a strong case that Balzac's work played a significant role in shaping the revolutionary consciousness of the era.
I'm starting to see these revolutions in a whole new light.
That's what we like to hear.
It's not just about kings and queens and battles and barricades.
It's about so much more.
It's about ideas.
Yes.
And art.
Uh-huh.
The power of words to change the world.
Exactly. Revolutions are multifaceted events. They
Yeah.
touch every aspect of society.
So to truly understand them, we need to look beyond just the historical headlines
We did.
and explore those cultural and intellectual currents that were shaping them.
I couldn't agree more.
I'm ready for more. We've covered so much ground.
We have.
But I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
I think that's true. There's always more to learn.
Let's continue our deep dive into the French Revolutions.
Let's do it.
It's incredible to think about the ripple effects these revolutions had, not just on France, but on the world.
You know, we've talked about the major players,
Yeah.
the huge changes, but what really gets me is the human side of all this.
I agree with that.
Imagine yourself on the streets of Paris back then.
Bustling streets.
People from all walks of life debating the future of their nation.
The energy must have been incredible.
Electrifying. There's a constant state of flux.
Yeah.
One day you're a baker, the next you might be on a barricade.
Wow.
And for women, it was a particularly unique experience.
That's right.
Remember, we started this deep dive with a research guide all about women in the French Revolutions.
Yeah, their stories are often kind of pushed aside.
They are, but they're active participants.
They were leading marches.
Fighting on the front lines.
Running secret newspapers.
Loyalists.
Think about the women who marched on Versailles demanding bread and forcing the royal family back to Paris.
Exactly. Or the women who formed political clubs, pushing for their rights, even as everything was falling apart around them.
So they're challenging gender roles amidst all this chaos.
Absolutely.
It makes you realize that revolutions aren't just about changing who's in charge.
Right.
It's about changing what's possible for everyone.
Exactly. Pushing the boundaries of what society thinks is acceptable, what it values, what it allows.
And those women, their courage, their determination, we need to remember them.
And thankfully, more and more research is being done to bring those stories to light.
It's true. History isn't just about the famous people
No.
or the battles. It's about everyday people's experiences.
It really is a tapestry of individual lives.
That's a good way to put it. And speaking of those individual experiences, I'm curious, how did all this turmoil affect things like art,
Oh, good question.
literature, fashion?
You know, revolutions often act as a catalyst for creativity.
In what way?
Art becomes an outlet
Fact.
to express the anxieties,
Okay.
the hopes, the raw energy of that time.
So what, like paintings?
Paintings, sculptures, capturing those big moments, the storming of the Bastille,
Oh, yeah.
or symbolizing the triumph of the people,
Those grand romantic works, I can picture them.
full of passion and drama.
Exactly. But what about everyday life? Like, did the revolutions change the way people dressed?
Oh, absolutely. Fashion became a way to express your revolutionary beliefs.
So those fancy aristocratic styles were out.
Gone simpler, more egalitarian clothing. That was the new trend.
Like the sans-culottes.
Exactly, with their plain trousers and red caps.
A visual rejection of the old ways.
And even women's fashion shifted.
Really?
Some women started wearing more practical clothing.
That allowed them to move more freely.
Right. It reflected their changing roles in society.
So we've talked about the causes,
Right.
the consequences, the big players,
Yes.
the everyday experiences.
And even the art.
What's the lasting takeaway here? What should our listeners be thinking about after this deep dive?
I think the most important question is, how do the French revolutions still resonate with us today?
That's a good one.
The fight for liberty, equality, the right to self-determination.
Yeah.
These are still things we're fighting for all over the world.
So those ideals are timeless.
They are. And we're still grappling with those questions of social justice,
Political representation.
the balance of power.
And these revolutions show us that even though they were flawed and violent, people have the power to change the course of history.
They provide a blueprint, not a perfect one, but a reminder that things can change
That's hopeful.
and that people can shape their own destinies.
It's inspiring. I'm definitely going to check out those readings about the women of the revolution.
You should.
And for everyone listening, I encourage you, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep learning.
Because understanding history and understanding ourselves, it's a journey.
And it's never really over.
And nope, it's an ongoing conversation we all have a part in shaping.
I love that. Until next time, keep those revolutionary spirits burning.